afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please do let us know if you can't hear us or see any slides on your screen. But I'm Bridget and I'm here with Steph. We're from Harrington Carmichael Solicitors, and we're just going to be chatting today sort of about lasting powers of attorney. So do you want to introduce yourself, Steph?
Hi, so I'm Steph Collins. I'm a paralegal here at Harrington Carmichael, and I am in the Private Wealth and Inheritance Department, and we look closely at lasting powers of attorney and anything that is involved within that.
And yes, I'm Bridget. I'm a trainee solicitor in the team with Steph. And yes, I do the same. So let's get started. That's us, just so you can't see our faces on screen, you know what we look like. So, what are lasting powers of attorney? So just bring it sort of right back to the beginning. These are two legal documents. You have one for your health and welfare and one for your property and financial affairs. So within these two documents, they're sort of for individuals that do have capacity at this time. Within these two documents, you're basically able to appoint individuals, this can be friends or family, or maybe for the property and financial affairs, a firm such as Harrington Carmichael, to sort of make decisions for you. This could be, again, when you lose your capacity or unable to make certain decisions relating to your personal welfare and finances. So these individuals that you appoint, these would be called your attorneys, to make these decisions for you. And there's also the option to be able to appoint replacement attorneys, sort of in the circumstance that your original attorney sort of passes away or loses their own capacity or just is unwilling to sort of take up that role. So in terms of losing capacity, sort of a term I referred to a couple of times already, this is sort of function specific. So for example, if an individual has dementia, that's sort of something that I tend to think of when we think about losing capacity. It does not mean that they're incapable of making all of their decisions. It's very function specific, but of course an LPA would be sort of very important in a situation like that. I'm not sure, but you might have heard of EPAs, enduring powers of attorney, sort of in this context. This was a document that people made prior to 2007. They were more related to the property and financial affairs sort of side of things. And these were registered on use. I'll sort of talk about the process now, rather than then. But yeah, these were registered on use. And they can still be used, but we would recommend if people do say that they have EPAs rather than LPAs, we're looking to maybe updating them, just because EPAs can no longer be drafted. But when I talk about registering and the timing of registering, just a quick sort of whistle-stop tour on the process of making a lasting power of attorney. So people can do them themselves, but we would always recommend, of course, getting legal advice at the time that people want to put them in place. So if you come to see a solicitor's firm like Harrington Carmichael, or again, you don't have to, and sort of take you through the document, we can do all of the drafting. The individual making the document, those they're appointing, you all sign this document, taken through the documents. They then have to be sent off to be registered at that time with the Office of the Public Guardian. This can take up to 20 weeks before the documents are returned to us, registered and able to be used. So it's not a short process, but it's definitely an important one. So Steph's now going to take you through more specifics on the health and welfare document.
So as Bridget clearly explained, there's two different types of power of attorney. So we've got one for health and welfare. So Bridget did touch upon the enduring powers of attorney that used to be able to be made. These only catered for property and finances. So even if you have an enduring power of attorney, we would still recommend that you get a health and welfare lasting power of attorney additionally, as there's nothing that could have been made to deal with that previously. So health and welfare powers of attorney are specifically in relation to decisions, obviously in relation to your welfare. So that can be anything as to what medications you take, as to whether you were to have a vaccination. So obviously recently we had the whole COVID pandemic. People that obviously didn't have capacity at the time weren't able to consent or not consent to having that. So their power of attorney would have assisted them with making that decision. And there's specific preferences and instructions you can put within the lasting power of attorney that we could recommend to you depending on your previous decisions. So if you would want your attorneys, for example, to have details as to your previous medical decisions, then we would have to specify that. So there are specific preferences and instructions that it's really helpful if you come to a solicitor to assist with. It's not something that you'll see when you choose to do these on your own. So also within the documentation for specifically health and welfare, there is a page that's specifically catered towards life-sustaining treatment. So that's for if you are on a ventilator machine, for example, would you want to continue that? Would you want to do that for as long as possible and see obviously what happens in the future? Or would you want to essentially have the switch turned off? And that's something that you can allow your attorneys to assist with making the decisions for, or you can choose to leave it to the medical professionals and not allow your attorneys to deal with that. Without this document, as much as doctors will speak to your family, their decisions will have nothing to do with the end goal. So it's very important we have these in place to ensure that people can essentially talk for you as to what your decision would have been at the time if you were able to communicate that. So now looking at property and finances, I'll pass you back over to Bridge.
So in terms of property and financial affairs lasting power of attorney, these can be used sort of in different to a health and welfare. These can be used either when you have lost your capacity at the time or just with your consent. But this decision can be made on drafting the document. So you might think, well, why would I want my attorneys to have a say or sort of a little bit of control over my property and finances, such as my housing and my bank accounts, when I haven't lost my capacity? Well, there's certain things. I mean, I know we can do things like checks online now, but let's say you've broken your leg or something like that, or your health isn't very good, and you just need your attorney to pop down to the bank and sort your bank accounts out, pay in a check, etc. Well, they can't do that really without any permission. So if you give your attorney a lasting power of attorney document and say, off you go, please do these things for me because I'm incapable, that's what they can be used for. They can also be helpful in situations, let's say if as you get older, if you've moved into a care home, you need help selling your house or moving sort of your investments around, your attorneys can do that for you. It is a bit difficult. Sometimes individuals might think that their children can just call up and say, mum's in a care home or mum's not well at the moment, we're just trying to sell our property, if you can speak to me, or move her funds around. 9 times out of 10 they'll turn around and say, oh, no, unfortunately, if mum can't speak to us, we can't speak to you. And there's, yes, different things, fund management, etc. It just makes things move a lot smoother and quite otherwise stressful processes. But you might be thinking, oh, that's a lot of power maybe to give to friends and family. Your attorneys do have a duty to make sure that these decisions that they make are in your best interests. So they can't decide to just close your accounts and run off with all your funds. They have a role and a job to fulfill, and that's in sort of the donor's best interests. But it is still important to appoint any attorneys that you do trust. And if it is multiple attorneys, while there are sort of different specifications you can make in the documents about how they work together, it is good to choose those that have good communication and can work together in making these decisions. And like Steph touched on before, in both documents, there is this option to include preferences and instructions. For example, in your property and financial affairs, you can have the option for your attorneys to access your will, just to ensure that they don't sell or dispose of any gifts that you've chosen to gift on your death. And for example, yes, in your health and welfare, as Steph touched on, you could have a preference to say that if there is a time that your family are feeling you need to go into care, you could put in a preference to say, actually, please, can I stay in my home for as long as possible before I moved elsewhere? But Steph's now going to sort of discuss when should people think about putting in place their lasting powers of attorney.
So a lot of people only think about doing lasting powers of attorney in their later life. Generally, we see clients that are 60 plus. We very rarely see people that are younger when making these documents, and that's completely against what we would advise. Anyone over the age of 18 can make a lasting power of attorney, and we would recommend that anyone over 18 does have one. But just because you have one, that doesn't mean that that's your document forever for the rest of life. Obviously, it can be, but if your life changes, for example, currently, if you're not married, for example, and you are over 18, you might want to appoint your parents for them to assist. But then when you turn additional age and you get married, you might want to then appoint your partner. You can revoke the document and make a new one. So it's not that you're stuck with whatever your decisions are forever. Obviously, we generally see the older age because they associate that with the time of people losing capacity, and that's when people generally start to think about it. But it's better to have these documents in place before that becomes a concern, because as soon as that becomes a concern, you get stuck in a bit of a tricky situation. There is obviously a risk of something happening to you at any point in your life. It doesn't only happen when you are older. You can be in a car crash, or something awful can happen to you when you are younger that could restrict you or make you lose your capacity. So it's just safer to do it at the earliest possibility. And then, as I say, you can revoke it and put a new one in place if that's no longer your wishes in the future. So I did touch upon what could happen once you lose your capacity and there's no documents in place. So I'll pass over to Bridge for her to discuss that briefly.
So if it comes a time that you've lost capacity or unable to sort of communicate effectively, really, such as, on a life support machine, maybe not present, if you don't have lasting powers of attorney in place, and your friends and family are really trying to sort out your property and finances or your personal welfare, and sort of various organisations have taken hold, and it becomes quite difficult to deal with in a family and friends point of view. If an individual's lost their capacity, they're obviously unable to make these lasting powers of attorney documents. So in that case, there'd be something called a deputyship that would need to be applied for. These are an alternative. This is a process in which you apply to the court to become so it's becoming someone's attorney in effect, but they're called a deputy. The reason that we wouldn't sort of recommend thinking, oh, don't worry about a lasting power of attorney, you can have a deputyship if it gets to that, is while it's handy to have a backup, it's not really the most effective, in the sense that it's extremely long and expensive process. Sort of when we do advise and recommend to people what to do with a deputyship, I don't think many individuals quite sort of consider how long. We have many applications taking years rather than months, thousands rather than a couple of hundred. It's quite a stressful and long process to put in place, especially if someone who has lost their capacity is near their end of life. You can't always predict how many years there are to sort of partake in this process. So that's why we do strongly put forward that people should think about putting in place lasting powers of attorney when they're able. I'm not saying the deputyships are impossible. We do them in the situations where, let's say, people have different learning difficulties where they are unable to ever put in place a lasting power of attorney, and we can assist with the deputyship. But if it is possible to do an LPA, we would say that's the route to go, and not leave it too late. So yes, that's been a very whistle-stop tour over a lasting power of attorney. There are a lot of intricate sort of bits and pieces that we could sit all day sort of discussing and advising on. That's sort of what we're covering today. So does anyone have any questions? If not, that's fine. We'll be around. You know that we work for Harrington Carmichael, so you can always call for a chat.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time. And as Bridget said, if you have any questions, then please do contact us, and we can arrange an initial meeting to discuss things further.
Thank you very much.